We're realigning the territory, Scott. Effective immediately. Richard Sterling, our VP of Sales, said it with the detached air of a man ordering a catered lunch. He sat at the head of the polished mahogany table in Conference Room 3B, a space usually reserved for celebrating quarterly wins, not executions. Across from me, a kid in a suit 2 sizes too big watched me with the unblinking, predatory focus of a hawk that had just spotted a field mouse. My name is Scott Anderson. I'm 47 years old. For 20 of those years, I was the top regional territory manager for Apex Industrial Solutions, responsible for the entire Midwest industrial corridor. I built that territory from nothing, and now it was being realigned right out from under me. Richard leaned forward, his Brioni tie a slash of garish color against his crisp white shirt. "This is Chad Warrington," he said, gesturing to the kid. Chad brings a fresh, data-driven perspective from his time at Wharton. He'll be taking over the Midwest region. We feel it's time for a more dynamic approach. Dynamic approach. Data-driven. Corporate buzzwords designed to soften the blow, to make a gutting sound like an upgrade. I'd spent 2 decades building relationships so deep, I knew the names of my clients' kids, their dogs, and their favorite brand of bourbon. That wasn't data. That was trust. Chad looked about 24, with the soft hands of someone whose toughest professional challenge had been choosing the right filter for an Instagram post. "I see," I said. My voice was steady, a trick I learned long ago. Never let them see the impact. "So after 20 years of exceeding quota, this is it?" Richard gave a tight, insincere smile. "We appreciate your service, Scott. We really do. But the market is evolving. We need to be agile." He slid a thick vanilla envelope across the table. "This is your severance package. Standard 2 weeks. HR will be in touch about your 401k. He then nodded toward the door, where 2 security guards stood, trying to look inconspicuous. "Frank and Dennis will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings." The humiliation was the point. The public execution, the young replacement, the guards. It was a power play, designed to make me feel small, obsolete, a piece of old infrastructure being ripped out to make way for fiber optics. My knuckles were white where I gripped the arms of my chair. My heart hammered, a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. But here's what they didn't know. They thought they were taking my job. They thought they were taking my territory. They had no idea that the territory's real value wasn't on Apex's servers. It was on mine, and it was about to walk out the door with me. If you like stories about corporate karma, where decades of quiet competence finally settle the score with arrogant entitlement, hit that like button and subscribe right now. You're going to want to see how this played out. I joined Apex Industrial Solutions in the fall of 2004. I was 27, hungry, and driving a 1996 Ford Ranger with a rust problem and 150,000 miles on the odometer. Apex was a small player then, a regional supplier trying to compete with giants like Global Mech. My territory was a map of forgotten towns across Ohio, Indiana, and Michigan, the Rust Belt. It was the territory nobody wanted. For the first 5 years, I practically lived in that truck. I put another 200,000 miles on it, driving from one dreary industrial park to another, sleeping in cheap motels that smelled of stale smoke and desperation. I missed birthdays. I missed anniversaries. I distinctly remember one Tuesday in November 2009, sitting in a diner in Gary, Indiana, on a crackling cell phone, listening to my wife and friends sing "Happy Birthday" to my daughter Maya. She was turning 8. I was closing a $50,000 deal with a sheet metal fabricator, a deal that felt like life and death for my quarterly numbers. I told myself the sacrifice was worth it. I was building a future. I built it one handshake at a time. I learned that the purchasing manager at a Dayton Plastics company was a fanatical Ohio State Buckeyes fan. I learned that the plant foreman at a Detroit auto parts supplier coached his son's Little League team. I didn't learn these things to be manipulative. I learned them because I genuinely cared. Business for me was always personal. It was about reliability. It was about being the guy they could call at 10 p.m. on a Sunday when a critical part failed on their assembly line, knowing I'd have a solution by morning. And I documented everything, not on some company-mandated platform. In the beginning, it was a series of spiral notebooks, then a meticulously organized collection of Excel spreadsheets on my personal laptop. Around 2008, Apex tried to roll out a clunky first-generation CRM system. It was awful, slow, buggy, and completely impersonal. My boss at the time, a wise old salt named Frank Miller, saw the detailed system I had built for myself. He looked at my screen, which showed not just contact info, but notes on contract renewal dates, key personnel changes, and a reminder that one client's wife had just finished chemotherapy. Frank pointed at the screen. "That, Scott," he said, his voice low, "is the business, not the names in some corporate database. That's your sweat equity. Keep it on your own machine. Use your own software. The company owns the purchase orders you write, but they don't own the relationships you build. Never give them the keys to your kingdom." I took his advice to heart. I bought my own license for a powerful database application called FileMaker Pro. A few years later, I migrated the whole thing to a secure private cloud server, paying the $79.99 monthly subscription fee out of my own pocket. I never expensed it. This was my system, my life's work. I called it the Ledger. The Ledger contained 2 decades of institutional knowledge. It knew that Dave Henderson at Omniplastics preferred a phone call to an email, that his annual contract renewal was best discussed over a steak at Gibson's Bar, and that his daughter had just graduated from Northwestern. It knew that Titan Manufacturing's CEO, Mark Riley, only trusted specs delivered in person, not as a PDF. It held the cell phone numbers of maintenance chiefs who could get one of my hotshot delivery drivers through a gate after hours. To satisfy corporate, I would dutifully enter the bare minimum into their official Salesforce portal: company name, address, primary contact. To them, my territory was a list of 250 accounts. To me, it was a network of 2,500 people whose trust I had earned. The results spoke for themselves. For the last 10 years straight, I was named Salesman of the Year. Last year, my territory alone accounted for $18.5 million in revenue, which was a full 22% of Apex's total annual gross. I was, without arrogance, the foundation that held up a significant portion of the house. Then came Richard Sterling. He arrived 2 years ago after Apex was acquired by a larger holding company. He was everything I wasn't. He had an MBA from a name brand school, a country club membership, and a vocabulary comprised almost entirely of the latest business jargon. He talked about synergizing core competencies and leveraging disruptive paradigms. He saw me as a relic, an analog man in a digital world. He never once asked me how I consistently blew my numbers out of the water. He just looked at my age, my title, and the fact that I didn't pepper my emails with hashtags, and he wrote me off. His protege, Chad Warrington, was even worse. He was the son of Richard's college buddy, a private equity ghoul from New York. Chad's LinkedIn was a testament to unearned confidence, filled with phrases like thought leader and growth hacker. He had a 6-month internship at his dad's firm listed as Strategic Venture Analysis. He was a child wearing his father's suit, and Richard had just handed him the keys to the company's most profitable territory. My personal stakes were terrifyingly high. I was 47. My daughter Maya was a sophomore at the University of Illinois, a tuition bill of $52,000 a year. My son Leo was a junior in high school, and we were just starting to look at colleges. We had a mortgage, 2 car payments, and a 401k that was heavily invested in Apex stock, which I was now forced to divest at a moment's notice. Losing this job wasn't just an insult. It was a direct threat to the life my wife, Sarah, and I had spent 2 decades building. This was the future I'd sacrificed for, sitting in that diner in Gary, Indiana. As Frank and Dennis, the 2 security guards, walked me back to my office, the dead calm of pure clarity settled over me. Richard and Chad had made a fatal error. They had confused the map for the territory. They thought the data in Salesforce was the source of my success. They were about to learn, in the most painful way possible, that a list of names is not a book of business. My office was a small, windowless cube I'd occupied for 15 years. It was filled with cheap plaques from sales awards and a framed photo of Sarah and the kids. The guard stood awkwardly by the door as I packed my personal effects into a cardboard box. My coffee mug, the photo, a worn copy of a book Frank had given me. I unplugged my personal laptop and slipped it into my briefcase. Richard appeared in the doorway. "We'll need the company laptop and phone, Scott." I placed them on the desk. "Of course. And any company files you have," he added, his eyes scanning my briefcase. I met his gaze. "Everything belonging to Apex is on the company laptop, Richard. As per policy." It was the truth, just not the whole truth. He nodded, satisfied. He didn't know what to ask for, because he didn't know what the ledger was. He had no idea the crown jewels of the Midwest Territory were stored on a private server, accessed through the MacBook Pro right there in my briefcase. The signature already written in silver ink on his termination letter had made him the intruder, not me. I walked out of that building for the last time, the box in my arms, my head held high. The first call I made was not to my wife, but to my lawyer. His name was Ben Carter, an old friend who specialized in intellectual property law. I explained the situation, the 20 years of work, my personal database, the subscription receipts I'd saved religiously. Ben was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Scott, based on what you're telling me, you're in an incredibly strong position. You created this work product on your own time, using your own tools, and it contains your unique insights and methods. It's not a simple customer list. It's a trade secret. Your trade secret." The second call was to my wife. I told her what happened. She was furious on my behalf, then worried. I told her not to be. "Sarah," I said, "I think they just made the biggest mistake of their lives." Back home, I executed my plan. I logged into my private cloud server and downloaded a complete encrypted backup of the ledger onto a solid-state drive. Then, I initiated a remote wipe of the data from my personal laptop, just in case they tried to confiscate it through some legal maneuver. The master copy was now offline, in my possession, and completely secure. Meanwhile, back at Apex, the celebration was underway. I could picture it perfectly. Richard was probably holding court at a steakhouse, buying Chad a ridiculously expensive bottle of wine. Chad, I soon discovered, had already updated his LinkedIn profile. Regional Director, Midwest Territory at Apex Industrial Solutions. Excited to drive growth and leverage next-generation strategies in this dynamic market. Leadership. Sales. Innovation. I took a screenshot. It was Exhibit A in the Museum of His Own Arrogance. The first week of Chad's tenure was, I later learned, a comedy of errors. He started at the top of the Salesforce list and began making calls. His first was to Dave Henderson at Omniplastics, our second largest account. "Good morning. May I speak to Mr. Henderson, please?" Chad began, his voice dripping with practiced artificial confidence. The receptionist, a woman named Carol, who had sent me a Christmas card every year for the past 12, was momentarily confused. "You mean Dave?" When Chad finally got Dave on the line, he launched into a pre-rehearsed script about optimizing their procurement logistics for enhanced Q3 synergy. Dave cut him off. "Who is this? Where's Scott?" "Scott Anderson is no longer with the company," Chad said smoothly. "I'm your new account director, Chad Warrington." There was a long pause. "You're kidding me," Dave said. "I've known Scott for 15 years. You fire your best guy and replace him with a script? Don't call me again. I'll call Scott myself." And he hung up. That scene repeated itself all week. My personal cell phone, the number on thousands of old business cards sitting in desk drawers across the Midwest, started ringing off the hook. It was Dave. It was Mark Riley from Titan. It was dozens of others, all with the same questions. What happened? Are you okay? Where are you going? To each of them, I gave the same calm, professional answer. I'm no longer with Apex. I'm exploring some new opportunities. The new representative for your account is Chad Warrington. I offered no details, no complaints. My silence was more damning than any accusation. I let Apex's own actions speak for themselves. The chaos began to ripple upwards. Orders were delayed because Chad didn't know the specific receiving protocols for different plants. He offended a key purchasing agent by mispronouncing her name after she'd spelled it out for him in an email. He was trying to manage relationships with a spreadsheet, and the relationships were fracturing in real time. The emergency I was waiting for arrived precisely 2 weeks and 1 day after my termination. It came in the form of Mark Riley, the CEO of Titan Manufacturing. Titan was our flagship account, a behemoth with a $4.2 million annual contract that was up for renewal at the end of the month. For the last decade, that renewal was a formality, finalized by me and Mark over a handshake at their annual company golf outing. Chad, in his data-driven wisdom, had sent Mark's assistant a standardized renewal contract via DocuSign with a 3% price increase baked in. Mark, a man who considered an unsolicited email an act of aggression, hit the roof. He didn't call Chad. He didn't call Richard. He called the CEO of Apex, a man named Peterson, whom he'd met once at a trade show. I heard about the call from a sympathetic contact in the Apex accounting department. Mark had apparently been volcanic. "You have a hell of a nerve," he'd roared. "You fire the only man at your company who understands my business. You replace him with some child who communicates in corporate memes, and then you try to jack up my price. The Titan contract is officially out for competitive bid for the first time in 10 years, and you can tell your new boy wondered not to bother submitting a proposal." The loss of the Titan contract would be catastrophic. It would create a $4.2 million hole in the quarterly revenue, a hole that would trigger alarms all the way up to the holding company's board. Peterson, who usually remained aloof from the day-to-day sales operations, was now personally involved. The emergency had been created. The stage was set. My phone rang the next morning. It was Richard. His voice was strained, the easy arrogance replaced with a thin wire of panic. "Scott, we need you to come in. We need to discuss a smooth transition of the Titan account." "A transition?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. I thought Chad was handling that. "Just get down here, Scott. 10 o'clock. Peterson wants to be in the meeting." "I'll be there," I said, and hung up. I put on my best suit, the one I saved for major client meetings. I grabbed the slim leather portfolio containing the letter from my lawyer and the other documentation. It was time to close the most important deal of my life. I walked into conference room 3B at 9:58 a.m., the same room where I'd been fired. This time, the mood was different. The air was thick with tension. Peterson, the CEO, sat at the head of the table. He was a man in his 60s with cold, calculating eyes. Richard sat to his right, looking pale and diminished. An anxious woman from HR I didn't recognize was taking notes. Chad was conspicuously absent. "Scott, thanks for coming," Peterson began, dispensing with pleasantries. "We have a problem with the Titan account. A big one. Mark Riley is threatening to walk." I nodded slowly. "I heard he might be unhappy." "We need you to fix it," Peterson said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "You're going to call Mark, smooth things over, and hand off your files and notes to Chad so he can finalize the renewal." Richard chimed in, trying to reassert some semblance of authority. Look, Scott, this has all been a misunderstanding. We need to see your client files. All of them. The complete records. This was the moment, the culmination of 20 years of diligence and one old man's advice. I took a slow breath, letting the silence hang in the air for a beat too long. Gentlemen, I began, my voice calm and measured. You already have all of Apex's files. I assume you've pulled the client data from the Salesforce portal. It's quite comprehensive, I believe. Peterson slammed his hand on the table, making the water glasses jump. Don't play games with me, Anderson. We're not talking about that useless garbage. We're talking about your real data. The relationships, the history, the notes, the system you used to run the most profitable territory in this company. We need it. Now. I met his icy gaze without flinching. The system you are referring to, I said, enunciating each word with precision, is called the Ledger, and it is my personal work product. It was created on my own time, using my own privately funded resources, and it contains my proprietary methods and trade secrets. It is not, and has never been, the property of Apex Industrial Solutions. A profound silence descended upon the room. The HR woman's pen froze mid-sentence. Richard's jaw went slack, his face draining of all color. He looked like he'd been punched in the gut. That's preposterous, he stammered. Client data belongs to the company. Not this data, I replied coolly. I reached into my portfolio and slid a thin folder across the polished table to Peterson. I believe you'll find this clarifies the legal realities of the situation. Peterson opened the folder. Inside was the concise, 2-page letter from Ben Carter, my IP lawyer, outlining my legal ownership of the ledger as a personal trade secret. Behind it was a copy of my original 2004 employment agreement, which contained no language whatsoever regarding intellectual property created by employees on their own time. And behind that were 12 years of American Express receipts for my FileMaker Pro and private cloud server subscriptions, all paid from my personal account. Proof. Irrefutable documentation. As Peterson read, his expression shifted from anger to disbelief, and finally, to a cold, focused rage. He didn't look at me. He looked at Richard. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, broken only by the sound of paper being set down on wood. Richard, Peterson said, his voice dangerously quiet, did you, at any point during your strategic realignment, bother to ascertain the nature of the primary asset you were disposing of? Richard couldn't speak. He just shook his head, a pathetic, almost imperceptible motion. I decided to break the tension. I leaned forward, adopting the tone I used when I was about to solve a client's biggest problem. However, I said, I understand that Apex is in a difficult position. The potential loss of the Titan account is a serious matter. I am prepared to offer a solution. Peterson's eyes snapped back to me. I'm listening. Effective last week, I incorporated as an independent consultant. My new firm is Anderson Strategic Partners, I stated. My first official act is to offer my services to Apex. I am willing to license access to the ledger and to provide my personal relationship management services for the Midwest territory for a fee. I slid a second document across the table. It was a 1-page proposal. My terms. My firm will require a non-negotiable monthly retainer of $25,000 for data access and basic account maintenance, I explained. Additionally, Anderson Strategic Partners will receive a 15% commission on the gross revenue of every sale within the territory. In exchange, I will personally ensure the renewal of the Titan contract and the stabilization of all other key accounts. The agreement will be for a term of no less than 36 months. Richard finally found his voice, a strangled gasp. 15%? Your commission was 7. That's extortion. Peterson shot him a look that could have curdled steel. Richard, shut up. He turned back to me, a flicker of something that might have been grudging respect in his eyes. He did the math in his head. It was an exorbitant price, far more than my old salary and benefits combined. But it was still cheaper than losing the entire $18.5 million territory. "You'll get the Titan contract renewed?" Peterson asked. "I will call Mark Riley from this room," I replied. "The contract will be signed by the end of the day." Peterson nodded slowly, a captain of industry choosing the least damaging option in a storm of his subordinates' making. He pushed the proposal back toward me. "Have your lawyer send the official contract to our legal department this afternoon. We have a deal." He then stood up and looked down at Richard Sterling with a level of contempt I had never seen before. "Richard, you are fired. Your complete and utter lack of due diligence has cost this company millions and exposed us to unimaginable risk. Collect your things. Frank and Dennis are waiting outside." The poetic justice was so thick I could taste it. The same guards, the same walk of shame. Richard stood, his face ashen, and stumbled out of the room without another word. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Richard Sterling was professionally annihilated. Word of his colossal blunder spread through our industry like wildfire. He was the VP who fired the golden goose and then tried to charge the company for the empty nest. He never got another executive position. I saw on LinkedIn about a year later that he was selling high-end German cars at a dealership in suburban Naperville. Chad Warrington was demoted to an inside sales associate role, a glorified telemarketing job. He was tasked with cold calling potential clients from purchased lists. He lasted 6 weeks before quitting, presumably to return to his father's payroll. His LinkedIn profile was quietly scrubbed of all references to his dynamic leadership at Apex. As for me, I thrived. Anderson Strategic Partners was born. Apex became my first and most lucrative client. I was making more than double my old salary to do the same work, but on my own terms from my home office. I set my own hours. I hired a small staff. After 18 months, Global Mech, Apex's largest competitor, made me an offer to become their exclusive consultant for the entire upper Midwest, buying out my Apex contract for a significant sum and offering me an even more favorable commission structure. I took the deal. I took great satisfaction in watching Apex's Midwest numbers plummet after I left. They never recovered. The territory I had built from scratch, their former crown, Jewel, became a perennial underperformer, a constant nagging reminder on their balance sheets of the day they decided a Wharton MBA was more valuable than 20 years of trust. But the real victory wasn't financial. It was personal. It was being home for dinner every single night. It was taking a Tuesday afternoon off to watch my son Leo pitch in a high school baseball game. It was being able to sit with my daughter Maya and help her with her college coursework without one eye on my phone, waiting for a client emergency. The stress that had been a constant companion for 2 decades simply evaporated. One afternoon, I was sitting in the bleachers at Leo's game. The sun was warm on my face. My phone buzzed. It was a new client, a big one, confirming a massive order. I sent a quick reply, then put the phone away. Leo was on the mound, winding up for a pitch. He threw a perfect strike, and the crack of the ball hitting the catcher's mitt echoed across the field. I was there to see it. I was present. They thought my value was in the logo on my polo shirt, in the company that signed my paychecks. They were wrong. My value was in my memory, in my integrity, in the promises I kept for 20 years. It was in the ledger, yes, but the ledger was just a reflection of the real asset, the relationships. You can't fire a relationship. You can't downsize trust. And you can't realign a man who knows his own worth. For the first time, I wasn't just a manager of a territory. I was the owner of my life. And business had never been better,